Yes, I know I said this video would be out last week, but I'm a community nurse, I'm out and about, I'm seeing people who aren't well, and I put my hand up and said it's my turn to be sick. So I was sick, had some time off, but now I'm back. So, dementia. This is the third in the series of how to prevent dementia. And yes, we can prevent dementia. And this week, I want to look at hearing loss, I want to look at depression, and I want to look at social isolation. So let's go. So did I say hearing loss? What? Yes, hearing loss. What? Hearing loss. Oh, a beer with your boss. All jokes aside, we've been able to do a lot with reducing people's hearing loss. So we've had lots of workplace reform where people have to wear earmuffs and earplugs and all of those sorts of things. Timely procedures, and we now have things like cochlear implants. Absolutely brilliant. People who once were just destined to go deaf now have the ability to continue to hear. And the advances in hearing aids is just phenomenal. People now have these tiny little buds that they can put in their ears instead of having this great big thing wrapped around their ear. And so the stigma behind wearing a hearing aid is largely gone. And people are getting more comfortable with people with disability. There's no longer such a stigma with saying, yes, I'm deaf. So, deafness and dementia, what's that got to do with it? Well, I am glad you asked. They don't know. They don't know what the link is between deafness and dementia. But what they do know is that where they've reduced people's hearing loss, it's actually had a 9% translation in the reduction of dementia. Everything else being equal, the reduction in people's hearing loss has a 9% reduction in dementia. And by the way, being deaf doesn't make you less intelligent. There was a school of thought for hundreds of years that people who were deaf weren't intelligent. And they did study after study after study. But you know what was the really cruel thing? They did these intelligence tests that were designed for hearing people, and they did them on deaf people. That's really unfair. So all of these studies show that there is no link between intelligence and deafness. So please don't think that there is a stigma because you are going deaf. Nobody is going to think badly of you, certainly not your GP, and you might just give yourself that edge against getting dementia. Reducing the dementia risk has more to do with someone having once been a hearing person and then losing their hearing. Did that make sense? All right, let me put it a different way. So, and I'm going to generalize here. You have people who are born with hearing and people who are born without hearing or lose it very early on in age. What we're looking at is the people who are born with hearing. So they learn all of their socialisation, they do all their learning, they do all their interacting, their shopping, everything using the sense of hearing. And if you start to gradually lose that hearing, what ends up happening is that you can't communicate as well with other people. You might struggle when you're doing your shopping. if you go out for lunch, you might struggle to hear what other people are saying. And so when you're next invited for lunch, oh no, I can't hear what people are talking about, I won't bother this time. And so it socially isolates you. I remember my grandfather, not my grandfather, my son's grandfather, my stepfather. He was a carpenter his whole life, and he built some extraordinary things, very talented man. But he was doing his carpentry in the era where there was no hearing protection. So no earmuffs, no earplugs, and he was using the bandsaw and the jackhammer and the circular saw, and he went deaf. Now, you could talk really loudly to him and he would hear you. But if a child spoke to him, he couldn't hear them. Children's voices are much higher, and he couldn't hear that pitch no matter how loudly they spoke. And so when the grandchildren rang him up to wish him a happy birthday, he couldn't hear them. And when he went out to dinner, he couldn't hear what people were saying. And so that then meant that he didn't want to go. And so this was a man who used to be called Bing as a nickname because he looked and he sounded like Bing Crosby. And he was popular and he was social and he would be the life of the party. And he was a man, because his hearing went, and it didn't go completely, he lost part of his hearing, he stopped being the life of the party. And he felt like he was stuck at home. So becoming deaf throws up a whole heap of barriers to how you used to live your life, and you become less social. Now, what can you do about your hearing? Oh, I'm losing my hearing. I hear it all the time. Oh, it's just part of getting old. I'm a bit deaf, you know. No, go and see your GP. There are lots of things that can be done to improve your hearing. And I've had people say, I got my new hearing aids and I can hear the grandchildren. That's extraordinary. From not being able to hear their own grandchildren to being able to interact with their own family. That's a gift, and that's something that can be initiated by a quick trip to the GP. The hardest part of any sort of disability is acknowledging that you need to go for help. So if you're out at dinner or lunch and you're struggling to hear the conversation, see your GP. If people are telling you to turn the telly down because it's too loud, but you don't think it is, go and see the GP. It might be that you've got early stages of hearing loss and they can do something to help you. It's really worthwhile doing it. And not only will it give you back some of that life that you feel like you're losing, it'll also increase your protective values for getting dementia. And this is what this is all about. We don't want to get dementia. So look after your hearing, and if you think that there is something happening with your hearing, go and see your GP. So I talked about social isolation. That's the second part of it. So we can be socially isolated for all sorts of things. As we get older, perhaps there's a bit of arthritis in there. Perhaps when the weather turns cold, we're a little bit scared that we might slip over because our balance isn't 100%. We might have a heart condition. That means that walking to the letterbox is the most that we can manage. And then we have the news reports that people are being attacked, and so we're scared to go out. And so we stay at home and we socially isolate ourselves. So does social isolation cause dementia? Or does having dementia cause the social isolation? Is it the chicken and the egg? Well, funny you ask that. ASAP Science actually did a video on which came first, the chicken or the egg. I'll link it below. But they've answered it. I'm not going to spoil it now. You have to go and watch their video. Anyway, I digress. I do that a bit, you know. So what they looked at was, instead of what's causing what, they looked at what happens when people are in a social environment, when they go out and they are regularly social. And so you have to have conversation, and that triggers one part of your brain. You have to remember things. So you have to remember that you're meeting on a Tuesday, you have to remember you're meeting at lunchtime, and you have to remember that you're meeting at the coffee shop down the street. You then have to remember that you're bringing a plate because it's Barbara's birthday. You then have to remember she's talking about her grandchildren. Oh, that's right, her daughter just had a baby. So there's all of these sorts of things. Now, we once thought that once our brains got to a certain stage of development, that was it. We didn't grow new brain cells or anything like that. But they're finding now that we can create lots of new neural pathways, and socializing is one way we can do it. It's like another exercise for the brain. The more we socialize, the more we interact, the more neural pathways are connecting and firing up. On top of that, we're getting all those endorphins, all those feel-good hormones. You know, so get out there and socialize. And if you're a bit limited in the number of people you've got to socialise with, have a look at your local community centre. See what groups they've got going, see what activities they've got, see if they've got a course you might want to do. You know, our local community centre ran a course on how to learn guitar, or how to use a computer. You know, there are lots of things. Don't feel like you're stuck just because you've never done it before. You know, get out there and socialise and talk to people and meet new people. And sometimes we can't. Sometimes we feel like we can't do anything. Sometimes just getting up in the morning is a struggle. And so I don't want to talk about depression per se. What I do want to talk about is the link between depression and dementia. So many years ago, when we were fighting things like woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and other clans coming in to kill us, we would have a spike in adrenaline because we'd have to physically fight these things off, and our cortisol would go up because we're stressed. But we would burn these things up in actually doing the activity. And what they found is, with depression, the cortisol rises because we are fighting this silent saber-toothed tiger. We're fighting these demons, and the cortisol and the adrenaline go up just the same. You know, sometimes we can feel anxiety for something that we absolutely know should not create us any anxiety, but it still does. So the adrenaline goes up and the cortisol goes up. And the trouble with cortisol going up is that it damages the neurons in the hippocampus. Hippocampus. That's the part of our brain that is responsible for our memory. So forging new memories, it's cementing existing memories. It damages the hippocampus. And this is where I jump on the bandwagon. If you had a broken arm, there would be no issue with you going to the doctor. Broken my arm, think it needs a bit of a look at. And you get plaster and you go around and you go, broke my arm. What happens if you break your brain? What happens if you are so sad every day? What happens if you are anxious every day? What happens if you don't feel like doing things? Then your cortisol is increasing because your body's trying to fight it. Your body always wants homeostasis. It wants to be in balance. But sometimes things happen in your life And whether that's a physical thing, whether that's something that can be sorted with counselling, it's still a thing. And depression is the biggest mental illness that we can treat. And it's an illness, like having a cold. You get treatment for a cold, you get treatment for mental illness. And I'm really pleased that people are starting to talk about it, because it's reducing the stigma, but the stigma hasn't gone. Our male suicide rate is huge, and it's largely because of depression. So if you are feeling like your thoughts aren't quite right, maybe you're not happy, go and have a talk to your GP. You know if you're not right. Or talk to somebody. Get an ally, get someone who's going to be on your side, and go and talk to your GP. Because by and large, depression can be treated, and you can go back to that balanced state where you can be happy and have that smile on your face. So go and have a chat to your GP. Get some treatment for depression, and that doesn't necessarily mean just taking a tablet. It may mean that you need some medication support, but it might mean that you need to unravel some thoughts or something that's happened to you. And it might just be that you need to see someone who's a trained professional to help you unravel all of that. And in doing that, in protecting yourself from the depression, you'll also be protecting your future self from dementia. We can protect ourselves from dementia. We can get out and about. We can make sure our hearing loss isn't getting in the way of us interacting with those around us. And we can nurture our mental health. So I want to thank each and every one of you for watching this video. I want to really thank the new subscribers. Big shout out. Thank you very much. And again, sorry for the delay in this video. I will see you in the next one. It's going to be huge. Huge, I tell you. See you later.